So a very warm welcome, everybody. For those who are just entering, my name is Jorij Abraham. I'm the Managing Director of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. Before I introduce my fellow panelists today, I would briefly like to introduce the Global Anti-Scam Alliance for those of you who are new to our meetups. Um, the goal of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance is very simple. We want to protect consumers worldwide from online scams. And we do this by building a global network to actually defeat a scam network. We share intelligence via these meetups, as you are participating now, but we also have 8 working groups where intelligence is shared via email. We organize 3 summits every year, one in Europe, one in Asia, and one in America, but also have an online directory for members so they can find each other. And we just started with the GASA chapters, meaning that now in Singapore, soon in Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, South Africa, people also meet on a national level to share intelligence on scams and work together on defining better solutions to protect consumers from scams. And finally, we're also working on a cybercrime exchange to make scammers more visible and make acting on them also easier. And I just wanted to mention that we're supported by more than 100 members, of which our foundation partners you see now on our screen. And without them, this would not have been possible. Before we start, I want to express that we are working under the Chatham House rule, meaning that you can use the information presented by the presenters here internally. If you want to use their material, especially if you want to use it outside of your company, you first have to ask permission of the presenter. And finally, I want to mention that we are recording. So if you're raising a question and your question is selected, please be aware that your name might be shown in the screen, so it's not anonymous. And with that, I would like to introduce our speakers. Brian from the British Telecom, Josh from USA Telecom, Brian Gorman, and Huub Appelboom. And maybe start first with a short introduction round. Brian Webb, we have 2 Brians. It's going to be confusing. My apologies. Brian Webb, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, just refer to me as a good-looking one. Brian and I spoke beforehand, and we've made that agreement. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian. I work for BT, a UK ISP. I'm the Chief Security Officer for the Consumer Division, and my skin in the game in this meeting really is to talk about our Scams initiative, which I lead on behalf of the company.
Thank you very much. And then I go to the other very good-looking Brian.
Hello everyone, I'm Brian Gorman from the GSM Association based in London. I'm the FinTech lead. We are the trade association for the mobile industry. So our members are all the telco networks across the world, as well as several hundred key partners who make the whole mobile ecosystem work.
Thank you very much, Brian. Josh?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Josh Berkew. I'm with USTelecom, which is a trade association based in the United States, actually one of the oldest trade associations in the United States, and represents the telecommunications broadband industries. And in my role, I'm also the executive director of the industry traceback group, which USTelecom leads. And I'm looking forward to talking a lot about our work there.
Thank you very much, Josh. And last but not least, Huub.
Yeah, my name is Huub Appelboom. I'm with KPN in the Netherlands. I work in the wholesale department, and I'm responsible for developing all kinds of anti-fraud products, mainly that we make available to third parties to prevent all kinds of scams.
Thank you very much, Huub. And for the people in the audience, I want to make you aware, on the right-hand side, you see a chat screen. Feel free to introduce yourself. Who are you? What's your name? What's your role? What's your company? And also, if you have any questions to our panelists, please feel free to add your questions in the chat. The goal of this virtual meetup is to share what telecom operators are doing globally to fight scams. And I think the 4 panelists all have good initiatives. And Brian Webb, I would like to start with you, with your permission, to share what BT is doing. and I will be your clicker. So just say click and I will continue for you.
Thank you, George. So the statement here, becoming the world's most trusted connector, is a company ambition, not my ambition. It's a very lofty ambition indeed. Click. So why have I got a plan around scams? Well, just going back about 4 years, we were in a pretty terrible place. As we all know, the number of scams was going a bit mad. And we were getting to a point where our customers were not picking up the phone anymore, and we were getting about 14,000 customers a week calling in to us to complain in one way or another about scams affecting them. And so we decided to make a plan and execute a plan around protecting our customers more effectively from scams. Now, I'm not going to talk to this whole slide today, but the reason I put it in front of you is to try and demonstrate to you that we took a multi-channel approach to the problem. And the reason for that is, if we tried to pursue one channel at a time, or indeed focused all of our efforts into one or two of the channels, all we were doing was creating a Maginot Line, a fundamentally flawed defense. And so we decided that what we actually need to do was to move forward on all fronts in harmony. Now, you'll see that at the top right, I mention email as a channel, but you see nothing about email in this slide. And that's because we'd already deployed a shiny new email platform and spent a huge amount of money in it. And from the outset, it was pretty mature. However, just scooting across the different channels that we were looking in, voice was clearly a very big area for us, and we took a very simple approach to our biggest challenge, which was calls coming into the UK from out of UK, typically India, from scams call centres. And so what we decided to do as a network is simply to block any calls arriving in the UK where they suggested that they were, where the presentation number said it was UK. So, in this scenario, call coming in from India presents as a UK phone number. And of course, you've got a scammer on the end of the line. He doesn't know who he's going to be when he calls you, and he doesn't know who you are and the scam that follows. So what we did is we just blocked everything. Now, that sounds very simplistic, and indeed it was, but clearly complex to execute, because lots of people want a way around this. They want an exception rule, and you've got to communicate with a lot of partners when you're going to do something as drastic as this. I mean, I think we dealt with some 250 CPs around the globe to do that. There's a lot more we've done. I just don't have time to talk to it, but that's a single item within voice that we've done. On SMS, our next channel, we put in a new firewall. But outside of that, and a firewall does everything anybody here would expect it to do, prevents the delivery of scams, gives us the tool set to gradually tweak those controls, become harsher. But what we also did was took an approach that we needed to address our upstream partners. We needed them to know their customers better, so that what they were sending to us and through us in order for us to deliver to everybody's customers, that needed to be of higher quality. So we started with 21 or 22 upstream partners. That's now down to 14. And in the longer term, it's going to be down to about 10, just so that we could gain more control, drive more responsibility to upstream partners to drive up the quality of the messages that they were delivering to us. And that means we can be more and more aggressive as we go forward. And in fact, last week, what we actually implemented is a process whereby the major banks, for example, can only send messages to their customers through us, through one partner. Now, the benefit to that for a company like us and for all of our downstream customers is if they send through a single channel, then anything else that replicates their brand in any way, shape or form can be blocked. We don't need to think about it. We don't need to get confused over it. It's very, very simple and very, very clear. And so what we've done to do this and reinforce this is to change all of our contracts and introduce a new code of practice. There's a lot there, and I can take questions on this afterwards. In the customer services channel, that's where customers are calling in to us. We've reviewed all of our call handling processes. And we've done a proof of concept that's gone fantastically well, exploring voice biometrics, not to validate customers because we're concerned that our customers simply don't call us sufficiently frequently to use it as a primary validation call. But guess who calls us every day? And of course, it's the scammers. And it turns out it's a pretty good way of identifying scammers. And then in the digital channel, where identity is key, and knowing your customer is key. And typically, ISPs don't have the strongest authentication, and certainly not up to the standard of banks. So we've implemented a new single authentication framework that's going to be deployed to all of our customers by the end of this year. And that takes us onto a pathway over the next year or two of passwordless authentication. Now, we've not done this in isolation at all. We've had to work across industry. In fact, across industries, we work with every other major telco in the UK. We work with not-for-profits, a bit like GASA, but with Stop Scams UK, with the Cyber Defence Alliance, who work on behalf of a lot of UK banks, with the National Cybersecurity Centre, with CIFAS, which is the big not-for-profit fraud organisation in the UK, and with individual banks. Thank you, George. And so I just want to do a really little show and tell of the results. So if you look in the round circles from top to bottom, there are last 12 months statistics. So 76 million SMS messages blocked, 155 million calls blocked, primarily those coming in from places like India, 15 billion emails blocked, as I said, and I accept that's pretty mature anyway. And the number of calls coming into us has gone from 14,000 a week to about 2,000 calls a week from customers concerned about scams in one day. So a really dramatic change. Going to the right-hand boxes, I mean, this is the, if you like, the global totals. So since we invoked the international call blocking, 179 million calls blocked, 355 million SMS messages blocked since we stood up the firewall. And in fact, in the UK, probably quite uniquely, all of the major network operators are using the same firewall service. And the total that we blocked amongst us reached 1 billion in May of this year. We think we've reduced A2P, so this is partner to customer SMS messages, scams messages, by about 83%. This last week, we've launched a service for our customers, our mobile customers, to intercept suspect scams calls and to flag them, particularly pertinent with modern phones, because it gives us the capability forward to inject things like brands and messages from the caller. We've done a major AI trial with a UK bank. So uniquely, what we've done is we've shared our data and their data, and we're using it together to create a product that will send warning flags to customers of that product. So there is a suite of these in the UK, but this is, if you like, a commercial service that will provide a flag to financial institutions where they're having higher risk transactions, where we suspect that their customer has been in contact with a scammer. The voice biometrics was one of our really successful trials. We compared the voices of known scammers that we each could see, and nobody, not even the banks, were sharing the voice recordings of their scammers, and that came up with an incredible result that is now being developed as a business proposition by CIFAS in the UK. We've managed to push back on one or two things. StirShaken, a technology deployed in the US that the regulator in the UK was trying to get us to use, horribly expensive and also not particularly efficient. And we think there are better and simpler ways to tackle the issues of scams calls. And polluter pays, a big debate in the UK where the financial institutions were trying to be part of the competition scheme. So there are big results. Still stuff to do. 5 seconds more on the last one, George. Collaboration is key. You need executive sponsorship. If your chief exec's not bought in, you're not going anywhere. You've got to go across the channels, or the criminals are going around you. And I haven't been alone in this. There must be 70, 80 people across the business doing it. And it's not just the complex stuff. Do the simple stuff and you get great results. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much, Brian. I propose, please feel free to add more questions in the chat. And once every panelist has present, we will give the floor to the audience. Brian Coleman, would you mind sharing your presentation? Let me put it up for you. One moment. Here you go.
Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so as I said, I'm Brian Gould from the GSM Association. So we're the trade association for all the telcos in the world, as well as around about 200 or so other key ecosystem partners who make the whole of the mobile ecosystem work. My update today is on a project we're leading across the globe called Open Gateway. I'm just going to share just 3 slides to explain this to you. Apologies, StreamYard's impacted the formatting of my slides, so not sure why, but one for next time. So Open Gateway is a global project. Effectively, we're developing a framework of common APIs. And this is going to provide universal access to operator networks for key partners like fintechs. These APIs will effectively unlock access to key network insights that can be utilized right across the customer lifecycle to fight fraud, prove identity. And effectively, this is a common set of APIs. It's supported by the Camara project, the Linux Foundation, and as I said, it will expose mobile operator network capabilities via APIs in a consistent and interoperable API framework. So a good example of this, 40 years ago, the mobile ecosystem created roaming. So whenever you get off a plane anywhere in the world and switch your phone on, it automatically connects to the local network. That local network is very likely or will have an arrangement with your home network. So all that data is passed back in terms of your billing time, how long you're using the phone for, what tariff you're on. Those bills are applied to your bill when you get back home. So that's a global interoperable standard that was created 40 years ago. And this project has at its heart the same kind of goals. So whether you're a global digital company and you want to connect to an API in Brazil, or in Thailand or in Europe, the API would effectively work the same way. That's the goal of the overall program. So as you can imagine, it's a very large project. And as you'd expect, we've got telcos working at different speeds, but effectively we've got 66% of the world's mobile subscribers covered by this program. And we're building APIs as some markets are all already live. So lots more still to do, but a good start in the first year or so. The key to build on Brian's point that I've always found is frankly collaboration. So we've already proven the value of network insights in fighting fraud. We work with many partners across the world who already leverage some of the standard APIs like SIM swap and number verify. So these are deployed quite extensively across the globe already. In certain parts of the world, we partner with partners in those locations to better understand the needs of fintechs in that country and deliver solutions that are relevant to the market. This isn't about telcos across the world building 3 APIs and trying to find someone to sell them to. It's about understanding the needs of the market. So I myself work on a number of projects working with fellow trade associations. We bring our members together in certain countries across the globe. We do deep dives on problems and issues in those countries. And we co-create roadmaps for development in those countries in terms of the APIs that the telcos would actually prioritize. As an example, I work with UK Finance, the trade association for the banks in the UK, and bringing our members together to explore the key priorities. We developed a new API called Scam Signal to help fight scam payments even when they've been authorized by the customer. So in summary, it's a global project. If you're consuming telco APIs or think that could help you fight the fraud challenge that you have in your countries, by all means, check out the URL of the website for more information or just reach out. We'd be happy to explore more about it. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Brian. Very interesting. Josh, let me put your presentation online. Give me one moment. Hey, your presentation disappeared. I'm first going to give the floor to Huub, and then while I search for your presentation, Josh, my apologies. Huub, would you mind taking the lead?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Jorij. Yeah, I have in my presentation a couple of examples of APIs that we share as telecoms with outside parties. Yeah, let's go through it, and I have also an example on how you can apply this. One thing to realize, it's very important to work together with other telcos, and we're doing that also in the Netherlands. So all telcos are aligned. And the APIs I'm going to show you are also offered in many countries by other telcos as well, because it's of course very important that you have say a large market penetration so that all end users are protected in the market. Can we go? I can go to the next slide. Correct. Yeah. So these are typically the APIs that we have available today. Sorry about it. It's a bit garbled, the presentation. We'll fix that later on. We have three kinds of APIs roughly today in the Netherlands. One is match. We use that to prevent identity fraud. Basically, what you do is when you're onboarding a new customer, then you can send the data to a telco, and the telco will say whether they have the same data, yes or no, and can also tell you something a bit what kind of SIM card they have, what kind of subscription, if it's prepaid, if it's postpaid. And that can be very relevant in detecting scammers. Another example is a SIM swap API that we have available, where you can detect whether a mobile phone card was recently reissued. A lot of fraud is happening with internationally, especially with these SIM cards. So that can be a red flag in your risk system. And the third one that we have is number verify. It's a kind of a new replacement for SMS two-factor authentication. With number verify, the end user doesn't have to work with one-time codes anymore, so that immediately reduces the social engineering fraud that can happen with that kind of verification. So these are three APIs that are typically available. Let me give you an example of a case how this could be applied, for example, in the Netherlands for purchase fraud. In case of purchase fraud, the fraudster is coming into a platform where they try to sell stuff, but of course the stuff never gets sold or never gets delivered. The victims pay for it, but they never get their goods shipped. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you how you could apply these APIs in that kind of a context of onboarding on a platform. And in this case, we would be using the match and the SIM swap API. And you know what most parties don't like if you create a lot of friction in detecting scammers. So what you typically try to do is try to use the data points that we have in these APIs to see if you can eliminate the good guys from the bad guys. So in our case in the Netherlands, we have, if fraud happens, it's usually with anonymous prepaid numbers, because scammers, they would like to stay anonymous. And they typically use the brands which they can buy on any supermarket shop or a gas station around the corner. And what also plays a role there is usually they work with SIM cards which they recycle a lot or which they renew a lot, because they want to stay undetected. So how can you try to single out these scammers? You make a selection of the APIs that you use. You first check whether it's an anonymous prepaid number. Well, that's only in 12% of the users the case. Then you check what kind of brand it is, whether it's a relatively new SIM card. And what you have then left over is only 0.3% of users. And in those cases, you start asking for extra identification. Now, in the Netherlands, we have several options for that. For example, we have a scheme called IDIN from the banks, but you can also ask them to do a small transaction and that also works very effectively in deterring these kind of fraudsters. So in generally, if you can generalize this kind of approach, but what you should be doing for, especially if you want to keep the friction for the good guys as low as possible, that you use these kind of data points in your onboarding, and that you do a stepwise onboarding. And depending on the risk profile and the kind of data that you have that you want to protect, how high the risk is, how high the level of assurance you should be, you apply these different data points. And the ones on the left that you see, for the Netherlands at least, those are ones that you can do without any user interaction, because that's just exchanging data that you can do with your telco. And that way, that can work very effectively in deterring fraudsters. So that's my short contribution about a couple of these APIs. There's a lot more being developed. So take a look also at the Camara website that is available online, where a lot of these APIs are currently being developed, being standardized, and brought to life.
Thank you very much, Joop. Maybe if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat the link of the website you just referred to. I'm pretty sure that the audience would like that. Josh, I also was able to find your presentation. My apologies. Adding it to stage now, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I've got a lot to live up to for the great presentations and the great work that everyone's doing already. So I'm Josh. As I mentioned, I'm with USTelecom and the USTelecom led industry traceback group. I can give a little bit sense of what's been going on in the United States. There was some reference to it, but there's been a lot. In the US, we started with an illegal robocalling problem, high volumes of robocalls, whether they were scams or spam. And there were a lot of measures taken over the last decade, including all the major carriers are now blocking and labeling calls. There is stir shaking, which was mentioned. There is all sorts of new requirements for know your customer, know your upstream provider. The FCC has its robocall mitigation database with a chain of trust, but I'm going to really focus on the traceback effort. And Brian from BT talked a little bit about this too. In a lot of ways, I really like that concept that sometimes the simple things really work. And traceback in one way is a simple thing. I don't want to undersell what we do. We've built it out a quite bit, but the concept is very straightforward and simple, and it's highly effective. So what is traceback? I saw some of the comments in questions in there. One of the reasons we established traceback was to overcome the spoofing problem, that a call coming in, whether it was domestic or overseas, if it was spoofed, there wasn't a surefire way to know where it was coming from. And so what we do with traceback is a process just to find that out. And this is the simple part. We just go hop by hop by hop, and we find out from the provider that whose consumer got the call. We just go back until we find out where exactly the call came from. Where it's not that simple anymore is we've developed a portal. We have a lot of automation that runs this, automatic notifications, and we've been able to really build and scale this effort. And one of the things we've seen, because a lot of our data has been used for enforcement, because our data also shines the light on what type of traffic an upstream provider is giving its downstream provider. So that's a wholesale provider giving another provider, that we see mitigation happen because of that. We don't tell anyone they need to kick that bad caller off their network, but we do ask, what steps did you take to mitigate this traffic in our automatic form? And so one of the things we find out is that 85% of our completed tracebacks result in the caller warned or terminated. And we see this in the data sometimes. We'll see that a provider said, hey, we cut off this bad caller. And sure enough, we see declines in that calling campaign, and or if we trace it a week later, that it is coming through a different call path that we can then again disrupt. So a quick little history here. We established this almost 10 years ago now to address as I said, the robocall problem. Initially, it was just an industry initiative. It was voluntary. We found the coalition of the willing and got to work. But then it became a legal requirement. Our U.S. Congress actually codified a role for the Registered Traceback Consortium, and the FCC required it. We've had over 1,100 voice service providers from 75 different countries cooperate with us. And we began, like how some different jurisdictions are doing tracebacks now, with a spreadsheet approach. But now we do it through automation, through a portal. And we're doing hundreds of tracebacks a month, which are samples of millions or billions of calls. And so we've been able to scale up the effort compared to the manual approach from the old days, but also we've been able to add a pretty substantial amount of efficiency. And you can see this quote for an investigator. We're getting in less than a day data that would take them 2 or 3 months. And frankly, we, in some high priority tracebacks, we've even gone the data who made the call and disrupted it within an hour or so. So just wanted to share some screenshots of what the portal looks like, but I'll go through this pretty quickly. But we have an administrative team that administers the traceback process. We get call data. We get that from various partners, from honeypots, from referrals from law enforcement, from referrals from the industry, from referrals from the financial institutions. And our team reviews it. And if it meets our criteria and our need to prioritize, we kick off the traceback, and we're able to then it goes. And our team then only gets involved if they need to troubleshoot or educate a new provider or something like that. And so this is what it looks like from the provider perspective. Provider gets a notification from us that they have a pending traceback. They have a magic link to log in. They can also log in through their credentials to our portal, and they have a form that gives them information about the call, why we think it's illegal, what provider identified them, and then they can say, I got this from another voice service provider, or I originated this call off my end user. The information we get, it changes a little bit based on that. And so if they pick another provider, the traceback continues and launches right to the next provider. One of the things we've been really focused on, and I heard great things from the other panelists about data sharing and cooperation. So we've been really focused on how do we take our data and make it actionable and make it give the providers who want to be part of the solution here good data to figure out which providers they may want to work on. We have a number of initiatives related to that. But one of the things I wanted to flag here is, for instance, we name and shame providers that just don't cooperate with us. So that's available in the portal for providers that have cooperated with tracebacks. They can see who didn't cooperate at all. We have other areas where it appears to be a clear violation of the rules. There is a lot that's gray in our space. We're careful about that. But when it's black and white, we name and shame that. And also, we provide a lot of aggregate data to law enforcement. And in the United States, there's more enforcement than ever before in this space. And the vast majority of it is based on the data we are preparing. I think my time's just about up, but I just wanted to show that this is the impact. This is the combination of traceback and enforcement. We saw one of the most prolific campaigns in the United States was auto warranty, student loan. Auto warranty is gone. Student loan is basically gone. Complaints are declining too. So it's not just on volume. There has been an 80% decline of scam robocalls. There's still a lot of scam robocalls, to be clear. And then obviously there's been a rise in this more targeted scam calls, but the decline is noticeable, and people are noticing, as you can see in the complaints. And last quick thing, and because I know I'm over time, but last quick thing here is we've also had some success with the burgeoning AI calls. There was, as you may have seen in the news, there was a robocall pretending to be President Joe Biden and telling people not to vote, and we were able to trace that back to its source within just a couple hours of getting a call example, and that ended up being part of enforcement too. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Josh. Indeed, the deepfake or robocall also reached Europe. It was also a big news item here, and I'm glad to hear that you were able to find the organization behind it. We have a lot of questions. My proposal is that I'm showing you the question, and if you think you would like to pick it up, please do. The first question is from Japan, from Japanese police, I believe. The question is, what are the most effective measures telcos and/or regulators can take to disrupt fraudulent calls regarding spoofing? Any of you like to take this first question?
Well, I can carry on. I mean, so that is somewhere we've seen traceback effective, where we are able to trace back whether the call's spoofed or not and find out where it came from, how it got in the country, what are the providers that are enabling spoofing. It is definitely a little bit of whack-a-mole, but our theory of the case is the more we keep whacking the moles and the harder we keep whacking them, that is important. That is disruption. That is very effective in this space. So that is something we've seen with traceback. The other thing, I know Brian from BT mentioned stir shaking. I think it's hard to dispute that stir shaking is a very expensive endeavor. We have seen stir shaking result in a decline of spoofing. Hasn't solved all spoofing. It did, but one of the things we saw is some of the bad actors shift to being able to leasing numbers, where they still make the calls, but they go through a VoIP provider that through the wholesale market and just make one call per number and then move on to the next number. So again, always a little bit of cat and mouse with the scammers.
You were already referring to naming and shaming. We are working on the cybercrime exchange to do the same in the internet industry. I mean, certain social media registries, registrars, hosting companies are doing a great job to fight abuse. While with others, there is room for improvement, to state politically correct. But I mean, are you also considering next steps? I mean, some really don't care. Are there also, are you trying to really convince local law enforcement to catch these kind of criminals? Josh?
Yeah. So from my perspective, we've seen a tremendous amount of interest in the U.S. to go after the voice service providers, and both not just from the government and regulators, but also, frankly, Brian from BT was talking about it in the messaging context, but we've seen the exact same in voice calls, in that a lot of providers have used our data to figure out which partners they even want to work with, which partners they want to trace back. And we are working on initiatives they've mostly relied on call paths they've been involved in, because we are careful about not publishing everything. We consider, the whole map we have of how everyone's interconnected to be sensitive and not public information. But we are working on ways to responsibly get out more information. So that is something, absolutely. I think the focus on the voice service providers, making it harder we have a very distributed marketplace in the US on that. I think there's a very distributed global marketplace for that too. I think that's been really good. But yes, absolutely. We are trying to get data to empower criminal law enforcement against the actual scammers too. So that is something we are very focused on.
All right. Brian, I saw you muted your microphone. Would you like to comment?
Well,
Brian,
I was just going to advocate. I think industry traceback is a very important layer. Yeah. But, as telcos, we don't always have to accept traffic. I mean, one of the things we've done is with one CP, when we started blocking the international calls, the spoof calls that the gentleman from Japan was referring to, we actually took the view that one of the CPs, such a high proportion of their traffic was bad, that we kicked them off entirely. So I think that also applying technology to highlight suspicious calls to your customers is an important layer. But these are all different steps and all different layers. And I think the opportunity going forward, particularly things like with things like traceback, is for the CPs, the communications companies, to take a far more robust approach. In persuading, kicking, cajoling, sometimes bullying the downstream providers into actually knowing their customers. Because I think that is at the heart of all of this, if you know your customer, you can increase confidence levels and you can be much more robust where you don't know your customer.
And if I could jump in just to co-sign that, I think that's absolutely right. And I think all these tools, whatever mix of tools, whether deployed at a jurisdictional level through regulation or deployed by individual providers, they're all complementary. Like I think that, you know, Brian was talking about layers. They can all work together and absolutely, you know, analytics that a lot of providers does help decide what should our relationships look like? Who should we do? Traceback's another piece that you can feed into that. So they all work together, and I think that's really the effective solutions. Is how do you do a mix of complementary different tools that give exponential gains to each other too as you deploy.
I also want to give Huub and Brian the floor for a minute. A question from Ken Westbrook from the United States. Huub, I know this is a topic close to your heart. Would you like to comment on it?
Well, if you look at it, the things like traceback, and you know, you always need to have a number of solutions up your sleeve to combat the scammers. But for example, in the Netherlands, we have quite a good control over who's on the network domestically. And if in case we see any spoofing, it's usually coming from abroad. So what we did was we made a blacklist where, you know, as soon as a call is coming from abroad and we see it's a help desk number from a bank, then the call will be blocked. And in other markets, like in Europe, like for example in Finland, I know they've taken it even a couple of steps further. There they simply, as soon as a landline call coming from abroad with a domestic Finland number, they simply block the call altogether. Or if it's a mobile number, they can check among the operators where that mobile phone is indeed abroad or not. And if it's not abroad, then they block the call as well. So depending a bit on how your network looks locally and how much interconnectivity you have and where the scams are coming from, you can be very effective in blocking these kind of calls. But it depends a bit on what your local situation is. And usually it's not, you know, what you see a lot is when you make you fix one problem, then usually you see it popping up at the other end. So you have to be aware of that. As soon as you block, for example, these help desk calls, you also see it coming up in other forms, and that they'll try to scam in another way. And that's what, for example, why we believe a lot in looking at understanding the way how these scammers operate and what the alternatives they have available, and looking what works in other markets. But one important thing for us, for example, is the local regulation. For example, in the UK, currently Scam Signal is being very effective in fighting these kind of help desk fraud. But like in the Netherlands, we're not allowed to use these kind of measures yet. And it has everything to do with regulation and privacy regulation. So there we definitely need to have some more deregulation to be able to be more effective against these kind of scams.
Brian Gorman, any thoughts from your side regarding the question or what Huub was saying?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is an interpretation by national regulators of privacy regulations that govern their country. So there are a number of challenges in Europe. In the UK, that wasn't seen. Creating this new product was seen to be entirely in line with the regulation and was approved on that basis. Unfortunately, some of the regulators in Europe are still to be convinced of that. The product's gone live in Europe and is making a material difference to the banks in fighting these types of fraud challenges. I think the point the team generally were making was, you know, you implement a solution. These people are extremely clever. They reflect, they move on, they find another avenue or another way or another type of attack. But and indeed, over a period of 8 to 10 years, that's indeed what we have seen in the UK. If we were having this conversation 8 to 10 years ago, we probably would have been talking about SIM swap fraud. social engineering staff to kind of do account takeovers of bank accounts was where they started. That's how it started 8 to 10 years ago. That's quite a complex attack. It involves kind of multiple points. It takes time, and from a fraud perspective, it's very expensive. And then we started responding by building an API that could help the banks fight that type of fraud, and that API was very successful. And then they've just pivoted. Why bother taking all that time and effort when I can just phone George up, pretend to be his tax office, and get him to give me $1,000? So like, why would I do anything more significant than that when I can just fool him into making that payment? So in the UK, that's become the main attack. So was a problem, response, pivot, create a new challenge. We've now got a response, and we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, Hub's right to call that out. One of the things group of stakeholders, we just need to try and collaborate more with is regulators, and that's what we're working hard to try and do.
Thank you, Brian. Also a question from Jack for both Huub and Josh. What is the most valuable data that you're missing to prevent scams and other kinds of crime? What are the biggest technical challenges? Huub, would you? Sorry, please.
The problem is not that there is not that the data points are missing or that the technical is not possible. It's more the regulation that makes it impossible. You know, we have quite strict telecom laws in the Netherlands. That means that we cannot do any processing of traffic without explicit user consent if it's has to do with traffic that's not being used for traffic data that's not being used for communication. And that means in some cases you even have to ask the scammer consent to check his data. Well, you know what the answer is going to be. That's going to be very simple. And this kind of regulation, it's not of today anymore. That really needs to change. We need to have more flexibility there from the regulators. And that is the biggest hurdle we have today. It's not about technology or APIs or data that is available, because there's lots of data available. And even with the stuff we have today, I've shown you 3 APIs. If you are a bit creative, you can already detect quite a few scams, but more is needed in that area. But it has everything to do with what's allowed and what's not. Yeah.
Josh, do you have the same feeling for the USA? Is also regulation the biggest hurdle, or are there other hurdles?
No, I wouldn't say regulation. I think the biggest hurdle, one of the areas we're really focused on, is the global collaboration and expansion. So we're very focused on, as I mentioned, we've done tracebacks to where we've cooperation from providers from 75 countries, but we've been predominantly focused on calls to US. That's somewhere we'd love to keep building and growing and having an interoperable mechanism where we can build on that data and hopefully encourage law enforcement response. Because I think what was said before, I think that's the thing that just continues to be important. Is what was said before was, we solved this problem over here, and then there's a problem over here. We've seen that. Robocalls got harder to make at volume, so we saw text scams go up, right? We've seen the targeted attacks go up. So in the end of the day, the criminal fraudsters behind this is their livelihood, right? So they're going to keep finding the newest way to try to defraud people. And so we do see that needs to continue to be a focus, is how do you actually do real deterrence, real accountability, not just for the enablers along the way, but the actual criminals at the end of the chain too. So that's somewhere we keep focusing.
Yeah, and it's not only telcos that can play a role in this, and the police, etc., and law enforcement. The banks and the payment service providers can play a role in this as well. The biggest problems started also in Europe once we had instant payments going live. And that makes it, and it's something that you shouldn't underestimate, what the impact of instant payments has been on this industry. If the money can disappear immediately to some country abroad and it disappears, that's ideal for the scammers. It's about their business case is how easy is it to do and what is the chance of being caught. and how big is the reward. And and we've made it all very, very easy for them to do this kind of scams. And the risk of being caught is quite low. So there needs to happen something there, and we definitely need to have some deregulation to be able to do more together with the banks, together with the payment service providers, together with the police. Because I can't stress this enough. Once you start talking with each other and exchanging information and understand how the scammers work, then you can also prepare and also predict what their next steps will be. Because that is very important, that you prepare for whatever measure you take. They will react and they will start doing something different. And that's why it's important to have this cooperation and exchange this kind of understanding.
That's indeed exactly what we try to achieve with the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, bringing all the stakeholders together on a global level. Because if you, as an industry, try to act in one country, it will just move to the other country or to another industry. It's communicating vessels. Looking at the time, I want to challenge each of you. If you were the president of the world and you wanted to solve the problem of scams, and you have a magic wand, Brian Webb, what would be your magical trick you would implement right away?
That's a terrible question, to which I'm not going to give you an answer. What I will say, George, is this: I think the answer to scams is teamwork. I think that primarily, and I think all of us on the panel today have spent times within our own businesses and our own jurisdictions talking, gathering, working with stakeholders. I think that we all need to take a layered approach to these issues. I think it's prevention first, disruption second, enforcement third. As much as I'm a former enforcement man myself, we're never going to arrest our way out of this. You have to starve the criminals. And then my third point would be, and to share our learnings globally. Hub and I had a great conversation after your conference. I can visualize very easily where KPN is ahead of us in some respects, and where KPN is going to take our learnings to lobby with the government. I can see the benefits of traceback, but I think as a disruptive element, and I think that we need to focus on preventative as much as that, and it's a global issue. Working with the GSMA. I mean, Brian and I have had some great conversations over the last few weeks on this. So there is no golden bullet, but I think that working more effectively and collaboratively, we do have the limitations of our jurisdictions, but I think the power of what we are achieving, can achieve and are already achieving is a magnification of the effort that we're putting in. And my view is long may that last. I take a very robust view of scammers when people worry about their rights, because they're never going to sue us. Good luck to them if they try. So we walk the law to the edge, and we're not going to stop. Sorry, not a simple answer, George, but you threw me a hand grenade.
And I think you catched it very well, and actually gave a very good answer. So, Josh, any additions to what Brian was saying?
I'm going to follow Brian and sort of challenge the question a little bit too, but I don't think there's a magic wand. There isn't a magic bullet. I think it's all the above. I think prevention, detection, enforcement, all are necessary, and not one alone can solve the problem, all feed into each other. But the other thing I would add too, that is challenging for if the king of the world or president of the world, whatever role you had me play, I think it's challenging in the political space, but incremental progress is progress. And solutions like this, as we keep raising the barrier to defense, as we keep raising the risks to the bad guys, all of those is progress. That's not a satisfactory answer when you go to regulators of, hey, we're making progress, these things are working, but it's not, gone to zero overnight, but it's not going to go to zero overnight. It's making this progress. So that would be my takeaway too.
I agree with both of you that there is indeed no silver bullet. But Brian Gorman, maybe you have one solution in mind you really, really, really would like to implement next. Brian Gorman, you're on mute. Yes.
Yeah, I think for me, I would, the Scam Signal API that's been built in the UK is a pretty cool product, but we've heard from above how the challenges of getting that rolled out because of the interpretation of privacy regulations. So that would be absolutely an area, if I was in that role, I'd start to explore across the globe, try and create some consistency. How can we do it in country A but not country B, C, and D? So I think that would be my area of focus. Privacy, is a really, really challenging area. Those regulations are in place for extremely good reasons. But of course, to the point Josh made and Brian made, the fraudsters don't care about the regulations. They're bending them, abusing them all the time, breaking the law. So I think there needs to be a positive response in that place. I think that's the area where I focus on. But when you hear my colleagues and see the work they're doing, that's not a kind of theoretical discussion. It's a discussion that's wrapped in action, taking action to drive things forward. I think that's what's really good about hearing calls like this, the progress that people are making, notwithstanding some of those challenges.
Thank you very much, Brian. Huub, you have the challenge to close the debate. Apart from changing legislation, any other things on your wish list?
Yeah, I would buy a silver machine gun instead of a silver bullet because the silver bullet doesn't exist. But what I tried to show also in my presentation, if you combine a couple of these silver bullets together and you have more up your sleeve, then you can do something. And what's maybe even more important, if you talk about a magic wand, you have to be as agile as the fraudsters. And that is how you should be able to react, because then you can really do something.
And then you mean catching them also? That's what you mean? Huub?
Catching them also, but be also very flexible. So like it's the water bed effect. If we implement one thing today, they will change their tactics tomorrow. Within a week. And so what you need to be aware that you also need to become very agile as telecom industry, so that when they change the tactics, that you can adopt very quickly. That is the only way you can block these guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Huub. And I want to thank all of you and also the audience for asking many good questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer all the questions. Brian Webb, Brian Gorman, Josh, Huub, I really would like to thank you for sharing your expertise. I'm sure there will be many more questions, and I think you will get a lot of LinkedIn requests for further connection. I would like to thank the audience for being here. I really like to thank our panelists for joining. And I look forward to meeting you at our next summits or our events to share knowledge and intelligence on scams. And I wish you all a very good morning, very good afternoon, or a very good evening. Thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting you again to fight scams together. Cheers.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
George. Thank you. Bye-bye.